In my quest to find the best indie JRPG, I'm generally looking for a game that has its own unique voice or something of its own to say. Not to dismiss others that lean heavily on tribute to longtime classics, but for me it's not just enough to be similar to the games I enjoyed in my childhood. This is kind of a what have you done for me lately question, a Philadelphia Eagles fan sort of perspective, but I'm looking for more than just an imitation. Jack Move, for example, has its own unique sense of style, and Lunar Lux draws inspiration from the Game Boy Advance era while having a combat system unlike any other indie game I've played. That being said, there's still something admirable about being an RPG that is executed very well, even if it isn't 100% original. And that's where I've landed on Beloved Rapture, a JRPG by a small team that started in development nearly 15 years ago. It has a few interesting aspects to set it apart, but mostly hums to the same tunes you've heard from many other games, with its depiction of war, the occult, trauma, and revenge. But that doesn't make it a bad game by any stretch. In fact, I think there's a lot to enjoy from the first few chapters I've played, but is it worth getting in a month full of other JRPGs begging for your attention? Let's take a closer look. I'm going to be spoiling the first 5 hours of this game, so if you want to skip past the story section, here's a timestamp to hop over to. Beloved Rapture itself hops around a bit in the chronology, but the general story involves two central protagonists, Johann and Aiden, both of whom have been dealt heavy hands in life. Well, sort of for Aiden. I mean, he still lives in this fancy-looking castle, but he and his father are outcasts after having been banished from the Kingdom of Alexandria over internal politics. Johann's entire village was slaughtered by his own father, so that's kind of, I'd say, a little hard to find common ground there. Actually, despite how I just described it, there's a lot more build-up than that. The opening chapter of the game is perfectly paced, allowing you to get to know the townspeople and the relatively carefree life that Johann lives before tearing it apart. Johann's about to turn 18 and is on the verge of being crowned a squire, and his somewhat controlling mother is anxious about him straying far from the village. He's got a best friend named Zach who's always looking out for him and trying to mold him into a more independent and stronger person. And Zach has the unique perspective of having traveled outside of the village with his father in the past. At one point, he leads Johann to this mystical tree in a cave and mentions that there's more like it out in the world if Johann's willing to leave his comfort zone. But before any of that can happen, Johann comes back to his village to find it soaked in blood and flames, and the culprit behind it is his own long-missing father, Drago, a deranged psychopath who's thrown his weight in with a rapturous cult. Drago expects his son to become just like him, which kind of a tough sell after you just killed his mother. Meanwhile, Aiden has been given a letter of utmost importance to bring to the King of Alexandria, which is obviously a little awkward given the circumstances, but his father Aldous believes that doing so will restore their favor with the king and end their exile. During his journey to Alexandria, Aiden comes across Johann, who is despondent and suicidal, and brings him back from the brink, forging an unlikely friendship that is sure to be tested once they arrive at the kingdom. See, Alexandria is not exactly what I'd call a cool kingdom. I mean, no kingdom is, but we're talking about fantasy settings and not the real world where a monarchy is inherently evil. Sorry, I was briefly possessed by breadtube there. Alexandria is one of those all commoners are vermin kinds of kingdoms, rounding up people in the countryside to conscript into the guard or force into concubines. There's kinda no good side here, just a few good people trying to make sense of everything and survive. You'll run into other important characters for and against you, like the mage Krista, or this sinister gray-haired guy that might be pulling the strings, or Karuka, another person on the path of vengeance who has a literal berserker skill. The game is definitely setting up a lot of relationships and plot beats to untangle over the course of the 15 to 20 hour story, and I'm interested to see where it goes. Beloved Rapture plays like you would expect a 16-bit RPG to play like, featuring turn-based battles with an active time bar, treasure to find, shops to upgrade at, fishing, and a large world to explore. The exploration is probably one of the best aspects of the game, as there's treasure chests everywhere, including underwater. I haven't seen this many wet chests since The Man Show. I'm just kidding, I'd never watched The Man Show. Obviously, I'd watch Mansers.
Can you fart so hard your balls Balls explode!
Someone must have seeded a rain cloud with money at some point, because there's gold just lying on the grass everywhere. Is this why monsters always carry gold in RPGs? They just sort of slither over top of it and it sticks to them? Fighting monsters is a relatively quick affair, though your damage numbers aren't quite as high as you might be used to. Beloved Rapture keeps the damage numbers, experience points, and gold relatively modest in scale compared to its contemporaries, though not quite as low as a Mario RPG game. Though like a Mario RPG, leveling up grants you the ability to apply bonuses to your stats, which can help you build up characters the way you like, at least a little bit. As you attack enemies, you'll build up a relica meter, basically a limit break that costs mana to use and deals massive damage. But of course, there's elemental affinities and weaknesses to exploit, and a pretty useful defense skill that heals you, but only if you aren't repeatedly defending, which is a handy little check and balance. Only one character has access to a flat-out heal spell, so you'll be relying on defending or using potions to top yourself off. Although you can also use the plants and mushrooms you forge to do a bit of healing to your HP and mana too. So again, a lot of incentive to explore. And I could be wrong, but I think there's even optional story to find. At one point I went into this cave and found someone from Johan's village living with some runaways. And I don't think it's in the progression path of the game, it's just something you can check out if you notice it. Anyone looking for some puzzling to go with their dungeon crawling, don't get too excited. There are some occasional button and wait puzzles and some ice sliding puzzles, but Lufia this ain't. In general, you'll be exploring and fighting more than thinking. Like other indie titles, Beloved Rapture features several helpful amenities, such as autosave, being able to hop off cliffs, changing the game and battle speed in the options menu if you're a turbo pervert, and statues and campfires in the wild that can heal your party for free. This doesn't mean that the game is easy, however, it's just fair. The battles can actually get pretty tough, especially the bosses. While I've only died once so far due to lack of preparation, the boss battles will keep you on your toes, mixing up attacking with healing, with relica attacks with defending. The first time you get access to 3 people at once, it starts getting very hectic in a good way. The UI in the battles isn't perfect. Sometimes I forget who is currently acting and I have to back out to see the cursor again, so I don't know, maybe some sort of highlight function or sprite change when a character's menu is pulled up would be nice. I do like that the character portraits change based on what's currently happening in the battle. The character portraits in general are a tiny bit wonky, but look, they're better than anything I could do in pixel art. In general, the game looks very nice for something that was made in RPG Maker 2003. Yeah, you heard me, 2003. This is the same engine that gave us Space Funeral and Off. Obviously heavily modified and scripted the fuck out, but still, I'm wildly impressed with how the game looks. It reminds me of RFL, another RPG Maker game that punched way above their weight class visually despite primarily using off-the-shelf assets. Beloved Rapture seems to mostly be made of its own assets, but if some stock stuff got in there, honestly I couldn't really tell, which is the mark of a professional production. Speaking of professional, let's talk about that SNES music because it's great. Lyrical, flowing, and full of great tones and instrument voices. As a chiptune musician, save states on bandcamp.com, I can appreciate when someone utilizes a system's sound chip to its fullest, and to do it with a 16-bit sound chip takes a lot of work and experience. The music here might be the best SNES-style music I've heard since Jake Kaufman's Boot Hill Heroes soundtrack. There isn't necessarily a standout track in terms of a catchy hook, but they're really well done regardless. I will say, however, that a couple of times the audio mixing was off, where a music track would play much louder than others. This might just be a bug that has to do with being made in an incredibly dated engine that's been stretched like taffy, so I guess I should just be happy that the game isn't crashing every 5 seconds. I'm pretty happy with how Beloved Rapture is shaping up so far. It's not perfect, the controls sometimes feel a little slippery, there's an occasional bug here and there, and the game isn't really making much of its own imprint yet. You can see elements of Suikoden 2 and Final Fantasy IV here and there, and you'll probably be able to figure out some of the twists and turns before they happen. But I still think this game is really well made for having been kicked around in development for over a decade in an ancient engine originally released for Windows XP. It looks looks good, sounds great, the battles are fun, and anything you don't like can be sped up if you're a freak. There are little nitpicks I have, like not being able to see the specific stat upgrades when purchasing gear, or swimming being a little awkward, the fishing feeling a little impossible at first, but none of that really detracts from the main experience. I'll also point out that this game features a major male relationship, which is something I've seen in indie games, but not usually from the high-effort RPGs. You don't need to correct me in the comments, I'm not saying it's the only one, I just think it's an interesting aspect of the story. The question is, of course, does this win your dollar over Ys X, Saga 2, or Metaphor? Well, maybe not all three of them, although if you can afford all three of them, I'm not exactly sure where you're finding the time to play a fourth game anyway. But considering Rapture is $20 and those games range from $50 to $70, I could certainly see it being a complimentary game to one of those three if you've capped your budget under $100, or a worthwhile silver trophy to anyone who just can't afford those big budget games yet. The game is still getting fixes and balance tweaks at the moment, so if you're willing to wait until one of the Steam holiday sales, you might get it in its most ideal form, but if you get it right now, I don't think you'll be too disappointed either. Sometimes just being good is good enough. Thanks for watching this video. I don't know how I'm managing to get these out one after the other right now. Maybe my room has become the time chamber from Dragon Ball Z without me noticing. But I've got another video coming out on Tuesday, and it's the seasonal Next Fest video with tons of demo recommendations. So you'll want to like and subscribe if you want to be reminded when that comes out. I've got a Patreon, and even $1 helps out and gets you early access to my videos, although $3 gets you on this list of credits as well. Once I'm through this marathon of projects, those early releases should come sooner and sooner. Okay, phrasing, sorry. My next indie look will be Forgive Me Father 2, which is launching at 1.0 just in time for Halloween. Until then, you'll find me in another